Joining me now is the Shadow Minister for Housing and Social Services, Michael Sukkar. Michael Sukkar, thanks for your time. Let's start with this announcement by Anthony Albanese last week. The government would finally start its home equity scheme, where the government takes a share in the equity of 40,000 homes. What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, other than the fact it was hopelessly late, there was some curious factors at play, clearly, Andrew. This was a scheme that was promised by Anthony Albanese before the election. It was supposed to have commenced on the 1st of January this year. The sector's been wondering where on earth this program has been, and it seems as though he was holding it back so he could announce it at the conference. Either that or his housing minister's so hopelessly incompetent that she was unable to deliver it on the 1st of January. The reality is, Andrew, it's a very small scheme, a niche program. To be frank, most Australians don't want to co-own a property with the government. There'll be some people who will be looking forward to it. I suspect a very small number. I think the bigger story here, though, is in the midst of a cost of living crisis, there was absolutely nothing that came out of National Cabinet last week that would make anyone struggling to pay their rent, anyone struggling to pay their mortgage, or anyone struggling to save a deposit for a first home any better, because there was nothing in it for any of those groups of people who are struggling at the moment with Australia's housing market.
Will you oppose or support this home equity scheme?
Look, we'll have a look at it, Andrew. Shared equity schemes are not new. This is not novel. This is not some brilliant new idea. They've been around for a very long time. We'll have a look at it. It seems very curious, though, that the Prime Minister keeps emphasising that he required state and territory agreement in order to put this forward. Now, that makes me question what on earth they've come up with, because a Commonwealth shared equity scheme could easily be delivered without state and territory involvement. So the fact that they seem to be including the states and territories either as an alibi for why it's running so late, or potentially the way it's been structured, means we'll have a close look at it. Again, it's a very small niche program. Most Australians, and certainly most Australians who want to buy their own home, either won't qualify for this, and if they do, I suspect most would choose to want to purchase a home for themselves, not to co-own a property with the federal government. So a very niche program. We'll have a look at it, and we'll assess it once we see what they're how it's structured and what they're proposing.
You could argue this policy of Labor's will simply lift the price of homes, and you could argue the same about your policy to allow young people to access their super for a deposit.
Well, I suspect, to be frank, with their program, it's going to be so small, Andrew. I don't think it's going to touch the sides, to be frank. So in a theoretical sense, I understand what you're saying. In relation to access to super, we've always said and made very clear that you need to empower young people to use their own money to get over that deposit hurdle. We know the deposit hurdle is the hardest part for first home buyers at the moment, but you also do need to address supply constraints as well. You need to do both, but I don't think the answer is to our housing market saying to young Australians, seemingly like the Labor Party is saying, which is we're happy for you to rent for your whole life. We don't want you to have a realistic aspiration of owning your own home. Now, there's clearly going to be a portion of people who do rent for their lives, either out of necessity or out of choice. But this government does not talk about first home buyers. It does not talk about home ownership. It has completely vacated the space. I suspect it's waved the white flag on home ownership for younger Australians, and I want to tell those younger Australians that the Coalition has not done the same. We believe that they have every right to have a realistic prospect of owning their own home, just like their parents and grandparents had, and that's one reason why we believe they should get access to a portion of their own super responsibly, to fund their deposit to buy a home, and then to be required to put that back into super at the end. So they have the retirement income benefits, but importantly, they've used that money in the interim to help them get into a home, which we know is so important for everybody's lives, not just financially, we know the social impacts as well.
Doesn't the PM have it right then? And you mentioned this earlier when he says supply is the answer here. It isn't supply the thing that governments and particularly state governments need to target. What did you make of the promise by the PM to pay state governments billions if they build 1.2 million extra homes, but only in 2028?
Well, I do agree with the Prime Minister that supply is the answer. It's a bit like saying puppies are cute. Yes, we all agree puppies are cute. We all agree that supply is the answer. But he had months and months in the lead up to this meeting. Months. We didn't need months of preparation and talking up this meeting for the PM to come out and turn out these hackneyed sort of phrases. No, we needed concrete plans. What are the projects? Where are the houses being built? Who's funding them? What are the time frames? What sort of stock is it? Is it reserved for first home buyers or is it for renters? That's what people were expecting out of this meeting. Instead, we got no commitments. We got a potential for money to flow into the future to state and territory governments if they do the right thing. Does anyone really believe the states and territory governments are going to turn on their form of decades and all of a sudden start pumping out new housing? No, the Prime Minister needed to show some leadership. Instead, what he did was he said, if you do the right thing, I might give you some money at the end. We've heard it all before, Andrew. The states and territories planning and zoning reform, it just rolls off our tongues in politics and in the media because we've been hearing it for decades. We sadly saw nothing out of this meeting from the Prime Minister. As I said, a meeting that promised so much and delivered so little. No one who's struggling with their rent or struggling with their mortgage or struggling to save for that deposit for a first home will have seen anything out of that meeting that made them feel any better the next day. And I think that's really the depressing thing for many people at the moment, that there's no sense of urgency from this government, and that's why they announce a policy at their national conference that's already 8 months late. How on earth do you have as a key part of your speech a policy you're supposed to have delivered on the 1st of January this year? Most people would have would feel too much shame to include something in their speech.
You're just teeing off now, Michael Sukkar. Now, let me ask about the PM's failure to name the petrol price. What did you make of that?
Oh, look, I think I don't think many of us would be surprised, to be frank. I think the Prime Minister is living in a world that most Australians probably wouldn't really understand. And that's partly the nature of the job and partly the nature of the man in the job. Getting around on the RAAF jet, he's certainly done a lot of that. But I think it's incumbent on leaders to try to the best extent they can to remain connected to the issues that their constituents and their fellow countrymen and women are facing. So would I say it's the absolute worst sin of all time? No. But I was pretty surprised that, when he drives past the servo, he doesn't sort of look up out the window and see what the price is. I was a bit surprised that he didn't.
What's the petrol price in your part of Melbourne at the moment?
Oh, look, it's about $2.20 at the moment. Yesterday, I think it was about $2.17 when I was driving down Canterbury Road in Vermont. So it's getting up there. And, when we were in government, we put in place temporary excise relief. This government took that away. And I don't think Australians have seen anything from this government that
is it time to put
has
that
eased
back?
Their cost of living.
Is it time for a bit more excise relief? Because it was about this price when you put in the relief.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't want to tread on our economic team as far as making unilateral statements like that. I just think the reality here is 15 months after the election of a Labor government, most Australians today are either poorer or definitely feeling poorer than they were 15 months ago. That's the reality. Their mortgages have increased by $22,000 a year if you've got an average mortgage. Your rent has increased by 12% year on year if you're a renter. Your fuel costs have gone up. Your grocery prices have gone up. And yet we've got our Prime Minister jetting around the world telling Australians that they've never had it better. I mean, we sit there in Parliament listening to the Treasurer, listening to the Prime Minister, essentially saying Australians should feel very grateful at how good everything is. And I wonder if that's part of his disconnect from what people out there are really feeling. And we saw that, again, not the worst sin of all time, not knowing the petrol price, but maybe he is so disconnected from what real people are dealing with that when we raise these issues in the Parliament, he's genuinely perplexed as to why we are saying that people are doing it so tough. Because sometimes in Parliament he does seem genuinely of the view that, you know, we're making this up, and we're not, because we're out every day listening to people and we know how much they're struggling.